Hi everybody. I've woken up today to find out that Britain's left the EU, or Britain's voted to leave the EU, and it's all, the details are shared in this article by the BBC, and it's noticed that the Leave campaign characterised themselves as the plucky underdogs, in with a shout, but certainly the real outsiders. But in part by using that status, indeed, building a narrative of the people versus the elites, they have got themselves to a position where they might end up on the winning side. Now, this is the BBC's narrative, and that is, here they've openly admitted, because the BBC, and I'm going to show you in this video, have taken part in a conspiracy to impose a particular narrative on the British public, and they've chosen to support the plucky underdogs, okay? And they've done that in a particular way of supporting this narrative that the vote to leave Europe is a narrative of the people versus the elites. Okay, and again, if we come right down to the end of the article, it says here, the Leave campaign dismissed warnings from economists and international bodies about the economic impact of Brexit as scaremongering by a self-serving elite. Immigration was the key issue in the campaign, with the Leave campaign arguing that net migration from the EU could never be reduced while the UK was signed up to free movement rules. Okay, and that was the narrative. And so what gave British people the impression that the elite of Britain wanted to leave Europe? What gave British people that impression? Because it isn't true, actually. The elite of Britain, most of them, wanted to leave the EU because they don't like EU regulations. They don't like the taxes they have to pay to the EU. And the EU regulations curb and oversee trading standards and practices. They've got strict regulations. Now, one of the reasons why the British people fell for this idea that it was a self-serving elite that wanted to stay in Europe is because of the way they presented the issues. For example, we know Jeremy Corbyn wanted to stay in the EU, but in order to dilute Jeremy Corbyn's power over the British population, over the British public, the BBC focus a lot of attention on George Osborne, a figure that they know is very unpopular among the British public, a person who is a known liar, okay, a person who is known, his senior advisor was caught smoking crack cocaine in a crack den. And, you know, what else can we assume? That George Osborne himself isn't addicted to crack and will say anything, basically, and do anything he's told to do. Now, according to George Osborne, he said Brexit may be for the very rich, but it is not for the working people of this country. To which the British people, on the hearing and reading that, will just say, since when has he ever cared about the working people of this country? We don't trust him. And they, knowing that the British public don't trust him because he's been set up, he's been proven a liar, so they then use him to promote the Remain campaign. That is an abuse of power, because by today's standards of academic learning in psychology and psychiatry and social sciences, they know very, very well what they were doing, and they were deliberately undermining people like Jeremy Corbyn's support of staying in the EU, and people like Joe Cox support for staying in the EU. I mean, just the very fact that an MP got killed for campaigning to remain in the EU is a serious point of concern about the kind of mentality that has been the driving force, the undercurrent of persuading British people to abandon their rights and isolate themselves. You see, so while the BBC have been previously, all throughout the campaign, referring to the issues, they focused very heavily on the Leave campaign issues. Now, for example, they give us 5 points here. This is from the BBC's Great Debate, the Great EU Referendum Debate. And there's 5 points. Now, the first point says, more than 1,280 executives, including directors from 51 FTSE 100 companies, have added their names to a letter in the Times newspaper backing the UK's membership of the EU. Now, these aren't a self-serving elite. You're talking about companies, not corporations, companies, British companies that work in Britain, that employ people in Britain, that earn money that is spent in Britain and who pay taxes in Britain. One of the UK's oldest firms, Tate and Lyle Sugars, has written a pro-Brexit letter to staff, saying after leaving the EU would benefit their businesses. And entrepreneur Sir James Dyson has described the vote as the last opportunity to regain control of our finance, our futures. An additional 261,000 children from EU countries would be expected to sign up for UK schools by 2030 if the UK remains in the EU, the Vote Leave campaign has claimed, the number swelling to 571,000 if Albania, Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia and Turkey join in the near future. Serving Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has come together with 4 of her predecessors to release a statement saying a vote for the UK to remain in the EU is vital for jobs and investment. And then we've got an advisor to Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has used an interview on the BBC Newsnight programme to criticise both sides. David Cameron for indicating he is unlikely to back EU membership for Ankara, and Leave for using the prospect of Turkey joining as an alibi to win support for its case. So on the one hand, you've got David Cameron saying, yes, he's going to support Turkey joining. And up here, we've just been told that we're going to get even more immigrants if Turkey joins. So basically, they're saying, well, the Leave campaign are right. But they're not saying it openly. They do it covertly. And covertly here, they have informed the British public that the Vote Leave campaign is correct, is most likely to be correct. Now, who are the Vote Leave campaign? To say these things that they've said, where is their evidence? Where is it presented here? Apart from to say, well, David Cameron's come out. And we know David Cameron's been playing a dirty, nasty, tricky little game because he's a very dirty, nasty, tricky little man who's been engaged in asset stripping British pensions. Go and Google Gordon Bowden, spelled B-O-W-D-E-N. Gordon, XRAF. He's exposed what a nasty piece of work David Cameron really is. Okay, so David Cameron wanted to leave the EU. He said he wants to stay, but we know he's lying because otherwise we wouldn't have had this referendum. And don't tell me that UKIP hold that much power in Britain that for David Cameron to now claim, as he's doing, to say that he feels pressured. He felt pressured. And so he decided to have this vote. Really? Now, you know, I voted to stay in the EU. I don't think the EU's a brilliant place. I think it's corrupt. As I said in my video, it's corrupt. I know it's corrupt, but I know British Parliament's every bit as corrupt, if not worse. But at the same time, I do not believe, and I'll stand by that now, now is not the right time for Britain to be leaving the EU. While we've got this set of criminals governing our country, and that means British people are now isolated in the hands of tyrants. And that's the fact of it. We're isolated in the hands of tyrants who, as I speak, are now conspiring to remove our human rights. Now, go and talk to me about sovereignty when you've got no human rights. So people who thought I was being, over the top yesterday in my last minute appeal, because unfortunately I've been so engaged in, dealing with issues for child rights that I've really not had time until very recently to devote too much attention, though I have helped with leafleting and campaigning for the Stay in Europe campaign. But now today, and this was, a few hours ago now, the BBC have decided to give us this. Now, this comes after Britain has voted leave. Remember that. When I show you this article, remember this is what they're giving us now. Now we voted to leave. I tell you, you will not find the word immigration mentioned anywhere in it. So, they're asking, how will Brexit affect your finances? Suddenly they want to talk about that. Okay. And this time, we don't get George Osborne. No. This is being given to us by Brian Milligan, personal finance reporter. This is from the BBC directly, their own reporters. Okay, now this is what the BBC is telling the British public. If you want to know what happens when a country leaves the European Union, you might as well ask an Inuit. In one respect, I mean that seriously. Greenland is the only other country ever to have left the EU or the European Economic Community as it was back in 1985. Residents of Greenland, including the Inuit, appear to have done well out of the leaving, but then their only export is fish. So, can the residents of the UK expect to net similar gains, or are our personal finances destined for the deep freeze? So now, they want to tell us about the pound. The value of sterling. At one stage, it certainly fell sharply as it emerged that the UK was to leave the EU, at one stage down to 10%, down 10% to its lowest level since 1985. This is likely to mean buying goods or services from other countries will become more expensive. Expect price rises. Inflation will therefore be higher. Goods being sold to other countries will become cheaper for the buyers. So, what in turn will that mean for our household finances? And here they are, all ready now to tell you all about it, about how your mortgages are going to go up, how your property prices are going to fall. And who's telling us this now? Who's telling us this now? It's not George Osborne with his personal opinions, is it? No. Who's telling us it now? Oh, the International Monetary Fund, the Treasury, the National Association of Estate Agents. And I'll tell you now, if they're saying that house prices are going to fall by 2,500 on average across the country, count it as 10,000, 15,000, because that's just the start. Oh, wages. So now the Treasury is estimating that wages are going to fall. They're going to be at 2.8 and 4% lower with a typical worker at least £780 a year worse off. Okay? Oh, and now they're saying that the government's going to have less money to spend because the economic growth will be slower. So they now say that there's going to be a shortfall between 28 billion and 44 billion by 2019 to 20. Pardon? I thought we were going to save billions because we won't have to pay any money into the EU, and we're not going to be able to. We're not going to have all these immigrants. But now we're told that on leaving now, we're going to be left with this huge shortfall. Since the welfare budget amounts to about 28% of all government spending, it is logical that it might see a significant portion of cuts, further reducing the generosity of tax credits and benefit payments. So there you go. Your tax credits, they are going to go. What George Osborne had to back down on is going to be a reality now. And that's why he is lying there, because he tried to cut the working tax credits and he failed. So now, by playing devil's advocate and supporting the Remain in Europe campaign and undermining Jeremy Corbyn and other prominent people and stirring up, taking part basically, the BBC, in stirring up public hatred and empowering, giving a voice to, hatred. And insane people, the kind of people that killed a British MP. Okay. They killed a British MP, Joe Cox. So, what is it really all about? It is about robbing the people. It's about robbing the people. It's about isolating a herd that's going to be fleeced. Are we going to be fleeced and then slaughtered? Because that is what they do. And they use dogs. He's a dog. And the farmer blows his whistle and the dogs run. And the sheep get rounded up because the sheep don't realise that actually they don't have to do what the dog tells them at all. They could all just run off and the farmer would never be able to get those sheep. But, and I'm trying to say to people, look, you're not sheep and you're not stupid because you've been rounded up like sheep. Because these people are very, very, very clever that are controlling things, and they know a lot more about human psychology and social sciences, and they manipulate people. And the nurse isn't supposed to know about that, or the bus driver, or the people doing their jobs every day. They know how to do their jobs, and they do bloody good jobs too, and they keep this country running. And I, for one, am extremely appreciative. But it's not the working people's job to be aware of how a trusted organisation like the BBC is manipulating them covertly, lying to them, manipulating them and herding them to covert agendas that ultimately are against the British people and are going to rob the British people of both wealth and rights and freedom of movement. Because just as the migrants have got no freedom of movement to come into Britain, Britons now will have no freedom of movement throughout Europe. And a lot of people are just going to be trapped here. So it's a very, very serious situation that, Britain has been persuaded into. And as I say, the BBC has abused its power. And it was undemocratic. I think it's criminal, actually. What they've done is criminal. I think the referendum itself was criminal. It was dumped on the British public at very short notice. And straight away, it became an issue of immigration, And we've got the BBC's own website here, which, as I say, scaremongering. You know, and Tate and Lyle Sugars, who, you know, they supported that. That was on 22nd of June. Tate and Lyle Sugars want to leave the EU because apparently it's costing them an extra 3.5 million euros on import tariffs to bring their boatloads of cane sugar. That's then the money they have to subsidise it. It's subsidising beet sugar producing competitors in Europe. Well, why aren't they? Why aren't Tate and Lyle using European beet sugar? Why are they using raw cane sugar? Is it because it's cheaper and the workers are really struggling and suffering to the extent that displaced Cambodian families have taken the matter up in High Court in London seeking compensation from Tate and Lyle Sugars over its KSL links? The action alleges KSL inappropriately influenced the government to make the land available and resulted to violence against villagers. The London branch of the legal firm representing the villagers, Jones Day, would not comment on the matter. But they breached human rights. And then, you know, there's even inference that children were being employed on the plantations, which, you know, the Guardian decided to highlight that aspect of the case. When actually Tate and Lyle, you know, are severely slamming it, are saying, you know, that this didn't happen. They're not using children. But they have been involved with the organisation that they've been profiting from, who have been displacing people and threatening people and driving them off their lands. This should have been the main headline of this. This is what the headline should have been. With Tate and Lyle, and then this, and also accused over child labour added on at the end. But no, they've made it the main story because they know there's doubt on this bit, that people say, oh yeah, but Tate and Lyle said they weren't involved in that. So they put the doubts first and showed this picture. But regardless of whether Tate and Lyle is involved directly in children picking sugarcane, that picture proves children are picking sugarcane. And that is going somewhere. Now, you know, and we all know Tate and Lyle, it is established exactly on slavery, on the slave trade, and there's no doubt about that. You know, and they're still at it today, you know, there they are today. And British people might say, yeah, we support Tate and Lyle, it's British. You know, well, why not just change that factory, have a factory producing hemp products that's from hemp that's grown in Britain, to earn wages and money that's paid into a British bank. Because how can we be independent when we still have not got control of our own banks, that we're still going to be run by the same financiers of international bankers that, you know, have been identified as a global criminal cabal? And now we're being told taxes are going to go up. Oh, but they're going to remove the 5% VAT charge on domestic fuel, but it's not clear how and when that would be achieved. Yes, exactly, because everything the Vote Leave campaign is based on what? Hot air. Hot air. Now, you know, during the referendum campaign, the Prime Minister said, again, using liars to tell the truth. The so-called triple lock for state pensions would be threatened by UK exit. So, you know, that will be happening. State pensions will be decreasing. Now, they didn't talk about that. The BBC did not talk about that. Why didn't they talk about it? Because they knew very, very well. You know, Cameron. They use Cameron, but not the BBC. Because here, you know, on the other thing, we get the BBC. This is from the BBC now telling the British public what is going to happen. Now they're coming out and saying, this is how it's going to be. Your mortgages are going to go up. Your wages are going to go down. Prices are going to rise. There's going to be less pension, less money paid in pensions, less money for welfare. Okay, you're all going to be at £2,000 a year worse off. And even working tax credits are going to be cut. Okay, because that is what they're now talking about, is bringing down, you know, getting rid of the working tax credits. So basically, you know, as I say, what George Osborne could not achieve, now it's going to be achieved by Brexit. So they've been playing a game with us. And as I say, they've had Cameron and George Osborne talking about the truth, liars telling the truth. So people will ignore that truth and instead focus on, you know, as Mrs. Wood says when she was asked, Miss Ward, when she was asked about the strength of the Leave campaign, she said, I've been quite surprised by how so many people have been able to be persuaded around this question of fear of immigration. You know. And that is what it has all been about. And, you know, down here, we've got the propaganda machine, because that is what we've been dealing with. You know, the idea that warnings from economists and international bodies about the economic impact of Brexit was scaremongering by a self-serving elite. But no, that wasn't this is scaremongering. This is scaremongering. Anyway, apparently now David Cameron's giving himself a perfect opportunity to resign and leave the sinking ship. He'll probably be off somewhere abroad by the time the proverbial shit hits the proverbial fan. But now, you know, they're asking Jeremy Corbyn's expected to leave. And why? Because now that's what they're going to do. They're going to root out everybody who stood against the Leave campaign. They're all going to be persecuted and kicked out now because they're like an undermined, you know, Jeremy Corbyn's now a threat to their agenda because he wanted to stay in the EU, so he's an enemy. Now, everybody knows that I don't support Labour. I support Ubuntu UK, you know, and Ubuntu South Africa, which aren't really a proper political party, but they've been forced to become one in this crazy world. But at the same time, you know, that I've said I don't support Jeremy Corbyn and I don't trust him as a Labour leader because of his involvement with things to do with Islington Council and the child abuse that was going on there. I'm not saying he was complicit in that, but I think he was very naive, and naivety isn't something I look for when I'm voting for somebody who's going to lead my country, you see. Because then I have to be like a job interviewer is with me when I go to apply for a job. And to me, somebody who's shown naivety isn't somebody I can trust to put into power. But nonetheless, I'm not saying, you know, I've always said, I've never said Jeremy Corbyn is personally a bad man. And I would hope Jeremy Corbyn leaves the Labour Party. Come and join Ubuntu UK. Get in touch with Paul Toussaint and join Ubuntu UK. We want alternative polling booths on election day, on the next general election, so people can leave their signed poll card as their vote. And if we get more people than the official polling booths, well, then we will have democratically won the election. Democracy will have succeeded. Because the alternative of going through to the regular official booths and putting a cross on a piece of paper and thereby declaring ourselves mentally incompetent, and we've chosen this person to think for us. No, I think British people are going to wake up to that. So I'd advise you and would welcome you, Jeremy Corbyn, to take part in supporting Ubuntu. And to, yes, you know, apologise for your failings of the Islington, the residents of Islington, because of what happened with the children's home inquiry that didn't happen, really. But, you know, they now want him to leave. David Cameron's talking about Boris Johnson taking his place. I mean, seriously. Boris Johnson. And, you know, as I say, I think what's happened here is criminal. I think it's criminal. I think it's treasonous. Because the BBC have abused their powers. Now, I'm not saying let's get rid of the BBC. What I'm saying is that management needs to be sacked because they've taken part in swindling the British public, and they've taken part in supporting extremists to the extent that Joe Cox, a British MP, was killed, murdered by one of these extremists. And that is a serious crime. And after all that, all their focus on that and giving us George Osborne to tell us the truth when they know damn well that to the extent that the very next day they can come at us with all these facts, how will Brexit affect your finance? Not how might Brexit, how will. And I tell you now, if they're telling us it's going to be 2,000 off houses, £3,000 off houses across Britain, and 7,000 houses from houses in London, you can guarantee it's going to be a lot more than that. They're giving us the low estimates here. They're giving us the low estimates. This will just be the start of it. And it's going to take 2 years for them to bite, because that's how they work, by stealth, before they sink the teeth into you, and you won't be able to scream and nobody will be able to hear you because you'll have no human rights, so you won't even be able to get so much as a solicitor. Poor people are powerless people. You know, and they're saying that working tax credits are going to be cut. Okay? Working tax credits are going to be cut because wages are going to fall. And all of that money that, you know, as I say, George Osborne wanted to take off the British families. You know, further reducing the generosity of tax credits and benefit payments. But tax credits is the key one here. Now, did the BBC warn the British public what was going to happen to their tax credits if they voted to leave the EU? How would that have changed things? You know, now they're quoting the National Institute of Social and Economic Research. This is what they've had up the sleeve all along while they were focusing on bloody immigration. And while the media was making a big play about David Cameron saying, yeah, I'm going to vote Turkey to get in. When Turkey's got an appalling human rights record and the rest of Europe don't want them in. Because of that. Because they're not treating their people properly. They're not giving justice, they're not providing human rights, there's still discrimination against women there. it is a disgusting, what's happened is a disgusting herding of the people, as I say, rounding up the sheep. And it's not, and you know, I'm not criticising the British public for behaving like sheep when they're being rounded up by dogs who are running to their master's whistle. And it's them that want Britain isolated, and they do hope to break down the unity of the EU. And now Britain's left, who knows what other countries will start leaving. And that's what they like. As I say, divide and rule. We know the strategy. If you think it's not happening, then, you know, you're not awake. But you will be awake when you're thrown out of your home into the street. And it will be no good then thinking, oh yeah, she was right. Or, yeah, but Jeremy Corbyn was right. It's too late. And that's why, you know, I signed this petition today, the referendum, and I do advise everybody to sign it. You sign it, and then you go into your email and click on the email, and then your signature goes through. Apparently, it's crashed. I mean, I haven't still had my email yet, though it might come later today. But, you know, 100,000 signatures means it's got to be issued in Parliament, and we do need a second EU referendum. Because, as I say, what's happened has been corrupt. It's an abuse of power, and it's a conspiracy to deceive and con the British people into believing that they've achieved independence when they have not. We have not achieved independence because we're still under the same financial system and the same economic powers. It's just that they're going to have even more freedom now, to the extent they're going to remove our human rights. They're going to scrap them and bring in the Bill of Rights, and they've already got them drawn up, and they're already now, as I speak, talking about bringing in the Bill of Rights. And that's why we know that Cameron wanted to leave Europe, because he knew damn well there was no way that he could remove human rights while we were still in Europe. So he's a liar, and he was playing devil's advocate, and as was George Osborne doing exactly the same. He was playing devil's advocate. And that's why they're twisted, maligned people. And you know, as I say, he's a dog. He's one of the sheepdogs. David Cameron's one of the sheepdogs, following his master's whistle. And the people have ignored, you know, that's why he was used, that's why he came forward. How do enemies work? You know, they'll send in soldiers to join an army, and then as soon as that army starts fighting, the soldier starts attacking the army from within. That's the kind of character he is, and that's the kind of characters they've been playing. And that's exactly what he was doing. He was claiming to support staying in Europe, but actually just by the fact that he's supporting it, he's attacked the whole movement and discredited it. And that is why David Cameron and George Osborne, they set up this referendum, and then immediately both of them turned back and said, we're not supporting a leave. We want to stay. So why did they set the referendum up? And as I say, David Cameron's excuse that he felt pressured by UKIP, that is an absolute load of absolute rubbish when we think how many people have campaigned in this country for so many things and not being given a shred of a voice. And as for the immigration issue, that was always, you know, European Parliament was always open for debate, and any leaders of any countries could have gone into the EU Parliament and said, look, our citizens have a certain standard of living, and we need to uphold that standard of living, and therefore we have to severely limit the amount of immigrants that are coming in. But we are prepared to put money into a fund, a European fund, that can then be paid into those EU, Eastern European nations to help them build their economies to a similar standard of Britain's, were prepared to put money in the pot to help them. You see, that was always an option. But, you know, the mentality that's governing the world, which isn't unique to Europe, it doesn't uphold human rights. At every step of the way, they want to negate. And as I say, they've used the issue of immigration now to persuade the British people to isolate themselves into a false sense of independence, because we are not independent. How can a people be independent when they're being governed by criminals and tyrants of power? And, you know, this is the reality. This is the reality of what we're looking at. Cuts. Less money, less jobs, less wages, higher prices, rapidly falling pound. Is that what British people voted for? So, where's the issue of immigration in here? Can you see one thing mentioned about immigration? I think this is the first EU issue report that I've seen off the BBC that does not include immigration. And now we will not even be able to migrate. So I do ask you to sign the petition, and I'll leave the link underneath this article. And I ask you to sign the petition and really stand up now. And we need to bring legal action. I think we need to bring legal action against the BBC for participating, conspiring to deceive and lie to the British people and support extremists' agendas to the point that a British MP was murdered in order that the British people can now be robbed. And for the very fact that you've brought this out today, BBC, the very fact that you brought this out the very next day and you put forward all these things are coming from you, your reporters, from all these experts that you did not even mention. Okay. That you've hardly mentioned. And suddenly now you're giving us the really bad news. Why wasn't that news given to us last month? Because you must have known about it. Because all these reports, you're not telling me that this reporter's only just read all these reports overnight from the National Institute of Social Economic Research, from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. From the Treasury, from the IMF. That's serious. And you give us this ridiculous picture of an Inuit, you know, ask an Inuit. Well, is that the level of living that people are going to be having in Britain? At least these people are living by their culture and they've been free to maintain that. British people, what's our culture? Our culture was what we won after the Second World War. What men like my granddad gave their lives for, fighting against, you know, right-wing, extreme far-right fascists. That's what he fought against. I don't care who was controlling him, what powers really created the two world wars, we know. But at the same time, I stand by what my grandfather believed in his heart he was fighting against and what he was fighting for. And he fought for my human rights. And he fought for independence for Britain. And Britain was independent. And when Britain was booming, you know, that's when they took us into the EU and they crippled our national economy. And they crippled the welfare state, everything. And then suddenly Thatcher comes in, gets rid of all the nationalised industries, and then we're crippled even more by Cameron. He comes to finally remove the welfare state and the NHS. Oh, and suddenly, when they've removed all of that, when they've removed the workers' support system of social housing, welfare, transport, jobs, nationalised services and industries, and our NHS, and even our schools, and our rights to university education, all taken away, even our rights to legal aid, all taken away, and now they give us a vote to leave Europe and come at us with scaremongering stories about thousands of immigrants coming to Britain, and then what do we say? The very, very next day, they start talking about the true facts. It's shit. And I plead Britain, wake up, and we do need to come out now. The whole of the country needs to come out. Everybody who cares about their child's future needs to stand up now, because I tell you now, this nation is not independent at all, and the people have got no power. They've been robbed of power, they've been robbed of rights, and they're about to rob our human rights and telling us that this is our sovereignty. Well, it bloody well isn't. No human rights, no sovereignty. Stand up, speak out, and yes, let's get Britain back.